Well, hello to everybody, and thank you for coming and listening to my very short chat about this film that I saw last week, and I must say I found it a very profound piece of cinema that was made to go live at an important moment, this 50th anniversary marking that moment in Selma. That moment in Selma that was beamed across the world and put into greater focus to people who may not have fully grasped the implications of what was going on with the segregated South. It beamed it outwards in a way that hadn't been understood before. Certainly in 1963 with King's March on Washington and the confrontations in Birmingham, Alabama, again, those underpinned what was to happen in Selma. But Selma itself marks another important milestone. In 1964, the first Civil Rights Act that was passed by the Johnson administration came into being, but it didn't do enough for voting rights in the South, and that was what came into being in 1965. And it's that pivotal question of voting rights. Okay, right, there's desegregation in the schools, in universities. The understanding of racism within the South has got a wider audience internationally and in the North. But what about voting rights? And that is what this film, the filmmaker Ava DuVernay, firmly sticks with in this very interesting creative work that she's made. So what fascinated me particularly about the film, I don't really want to talk about the film sequences so much because I really think it's so important to encounter a film without me saying this happened in the first sequence or second sequence. That is part of the thrall of the film, to draw you in where it's weighted, where it goes forward, backwards, how it deals with these complex issues. So I don't really want to talk about that. But what I want to say is that I think the casting was excellent on this film. I think what the film did primarily was also to look at the wider groups that were involved within the civil rights movement and how different groups had to work together. The personalities when you are an activist working with other activists, how that can work, how that can lead to the greater whole. That's very much in evidence there. Not only with the view of Martin Luther, with a focus on Martin Luther King and those key figures around him, but also within gendered relationships within the civil rights movement. That is something that the filmmaker gives a very strong focus to. The other thing that struck me was the physical march of people under the Pettus Bridge in Alabama. Worth noting that that bridge that has become an iconic symbol of the civil rights movement was itself erected in 1940. So in 1940, that bridge goes up across the Alabama River, and it is decided to name that bridge after a Confederate general who was, who came to be a lieutenant colonel who fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. So the South's relationship with the issue of slavery and the Civil War that had ended in 1865 was still very prevalent within the dialogue of what is operating, what's at stake within the civil rights movement. So the fact of Martin Luther King and members of the SLNC walking under that bridge under, right through the gates of a Confederate officer. A bridge named after a Confederate officer is something that I found is very important, and something that comes across, that kind of physicality of walking through a structure towards your freedom, to stand on your own right against the forces that are opposing you, namely the Alabama State Troopers. Now, the film plays has a look and examines and calls on the relationship of George Wallace with Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the president at the time. And some of you might have read a lot of controversy about this film. It's thought that the filmmaker has made too much. It had been argued in the New York Times and with those close to the Lyndon Baines Johnson camp that the filmmaker has distorted the facts, that she's put Martin Luther King's strive towards freedom, given it a greater accent, and downplayed, arguably, the pivotal part that Johnson had in moving his administration to signing the 1965 Voting Act. Just to say, for those of you who want to follow, there's plenty of The Guardian's written about this, the New York Times, in the week there have been plenty of journalists coming on board with this, the way that the Lyndon Baines Johnson MLK relationship is handled, and that's very interesting. Interesting perhaps to compare it to another film called Path to War that came out in 2002. And that film was made by the American filmmaker John Frankenheimer, and it looks at Lyndon Baines Johnson's march towards the Vietnam War. But in that film, there are certain scenes that replicate scenes that we will see in this film, but there is a very different take on the Martin Luther King and Lyndon Baines Johnson's dynamic. So that is something of the history of the moment of this film and how it's going to keep people thinking about the interpretation of historical scholarships. What Ava DuVernay said was she did not want to make a film that featured a patriotic white figure leading the African American struggle. She wanted to put particular emphasis on Martin Luther King and his mission and his crusade to raise the ante on voting rights and the appalling conditions of African Americans within the United States. Important also to remember that it is this year, in 2015 in Washington, very soon, that a major museum will be opening to commemorate, to look at the experience of African Americans over 400 years within the United States. Now, that has not happened before. There have been museums that have been opened in different states that have looked at the civil rights movement or different moments within the Reconstruction period following the Civil War, but no major museum. So it's not until this year, this 50th anniversary, that this museum is opening. And some of you, again, who might be interested in this can look at it on the webpage and see the curators talking about the reason why this museum has come, why it has come now, why it has been so difficult to get this project off the ground. So this moment of 2015, this important anniversary, ties in with lots of different plans and projects that are made. I just want to say something about cinema and historical memory, because I am very aware that this film, commemorating this 50th anniversary now in 2015, is released 100 years after D.W. Griffith's film, The Birth of a Nation, which looks at the African-American experience during the Civil War, during the Reconstruction, and during the period of the rise and the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. So I just want to leave you with that comparison, that span of 100 years, and also to add that Edmund Pettus, whose bridge we will see continually through the film, he was a leading figure in the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama. So those people who are marching for their freedom and their rights are marching right through a Ku Klux Klan, an advocator of KKK policies, and that's something that I found very profound visually to watch. Anyway, what can I say? It's a fantastic film, and I'm glad you're all here. And I think afterwards, if anybody wants to have a drink, and I think you will need a drink or two after this film, I'll be hanging around in the bar, so if anyone wants to talk to me about civil rights, I'd be very happy to talk to any one of you. Thank you.